Look, solo in this coupe with the ceiling off. Try to trail me home, I knock your ceiling off. Dirty money thumbing, hunters keep on peeling off. Falling out of love, I had to go and cut my feelings off. Dulling my emotions, I was so consumed. I use this paper as a bandage for my open wounds. Blanca Lotto got me tripping like a dose of shrooms. I know the nationwide dealers and the local goons. Allegedly, my pedigree is what you never be. Intelligent like German Shepherd breed, fight to the death of me. American bully.
This Twitter Space audio features Dr. Jeffrey Mishlove.
So for everyone listening, he's done profound contributions to the field of human potentiality and the exploration of the unknown, have garnered him international recognition and a revered status among his peers. He has an insatiable curiosity and unwavering commitment to intellectual rigor. He has devoted his life's work to unraveling the mysteries of the mind and pushing the boundaries of science and bridging the gap between conventional and alternative approaches to understanding human consciousness. As a highly respected researcher, author, and educator, Dr. Mishlove has paved the way for countless seekers of knowledge, inviting them to question the conventional and embrace the uncharted territories of human experience. His remarkable breadth of experience, our expertise, spans diverse subjects such as parapsychology, psychic phenomena, altered states of consciousness, and the exploration of spiritual dimensions. With a warm and engaging demeanor, Dr. Mishlove effortlessly guides us on a profound journey, weaving together scientific evidence, philosophical insights, and personal anecdotes to shed light on the interconnectedness of the human mind, the universe, and the unexplored realms of our collective consciousness. His ability to bridge the gap between the scientific and the mystical has captivated audiences worldwide, making him a trusted authority and a beacon of wisdom in the field. Throughout his illustrious career, Dr. Mishlove has authored numerous groundbreaking books, hosted the iconic Thinking Aloud television series, and conducted in-depth interviews with some of the most influential minds in the realms of science, spirituality, and metaphysics. His unyielding pursuit of knowledge, coupled with his genuine compassion for humanity, has fostered an invaluable dialogue that encourages us all to expand our horizons and embrace the inherent mysteries of existence. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and extend a warm welcome to our guest here, Dr. Jeffrey Mishlove, and prepare to embark on a captivating exploration of the mind, consciousness, and the extraordinary potential that lies within us all. Yeah, so that's the first time I've written an introduction, but I thought it was good.
Wow, yeah. I'd like to meet this. Well, maybe the best thing here is to just begin with questions from the group. Paul or Logan, can you select those questions? Because I have no idea how to do it.
Okay. We'll just go ahead and get the questions all lined up for you, and you just answer away. So your first question is, your life's work spans many unique fields like parapsychology, philosophy, and consciousness studies. What sparked your interest in these unconventional areas, and how have you navigated skepticism?
Those are both excellent questions. I'm currently a graduate student in criminology.
Well, it looks, sir, we're having a little bit of technical difficulties. I'll give you just a second to get a better signal there. No worries.
Okay. Signal better now? Was my voice distorted?
Yeah, it's not much better. You're coming in and out quite a bit. I'm not sure if you're using a Wi-Fi and if you need to get closer to your router or something like that, but or you're just in a bad area on your cell. I'm not sure, but I'll give you a moment.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, we were hearing you pretty well earlier.
Sure, I can go over next. Let's see if that's any better.
Much better.
Okay. So I guess I should repeat what I was saying earlier, which is that in 1972, I was a graduate student in criminology at the University of California. And I did get a master's degree in criminology, but I began having a profound series of psychic dreams, and they literally changed my life. They guided me to begin doing interviews, and they really pushed me out of criminology. In one of these dreams, a great uncle of mine, Uncle Harry, came, and it turned out. I learned later the dream was at the moment of his death, but it was the most powerful dream of my whole life. When I woke up from that dream, I was just crying tears of joy and singing a very sacred song from my own religious background of Judaism. And so I wrote home, said, "How's Uncle Harry?" I had a dream about him, and my mother called me immediately when she got my letter and said, "How did you know Uncle Harry had just died?" I later calculated that he died in Wisconsin. I was in California at the time, so they were 2 hours ahead, and he died at around 9:30. My dream was like at 7:30 in the morning, so it was pretty much simultaneous to his death. And when I realized that, I came to the conclusion that I could no longer continue my work focusing on the negative side of human deviance, meaning crime and psychopathology. I realized that the time had come for me to refocus my life and study the things that really, at that point, interested me the most, which was mysticism, psychic functioning, creativity, intuition. But there were no ways to do that at the university. You could study crime and psychopathology at any university, but these other topics were very, very hard to find an academic program. I didn't know what to do. I agonized about it for months. And finally, one day I knew I was going to have another dream that night that would give me an answer. And indeed it did. I dreamt I was visiting some friends across town in Berkeley and knocked on their door of their apartment in married student housing. There was no answer, but in the dream, I found a key, let myself into their apartment, and when I walked in to their living room in the dream, there was a magazine right in the middle of the floor, and I picked it up and started paging through it. The name of the magazine in my dream was called EYE. And as I was paging through the magazine, I woke up with this feeling of exhilaration, like this is the answer. But since I had no idea what it meant, I acted out the dream. I ran across town to that house in married student housing, knocked on the door. There was no answer, just as I had dreamt. I walked into the living room. Well, I knew where they hid the key. So I did. I let myself in. And in the middle of the living room floor, I found a magazine called Focus. And I began paging through it. That magazine literally brought focus to my life. It was the magazine of listener sponsored radio and television, KQED, in the San Francisco Bay Area where I was living. And I made a decision at that time I could pursue my interests by getting involved in the non commercial sector of the media, which was a huge decision for me because at the time I didn't own a radio or a television. And I didn't even believe in them. I was a long haired hippie, and I thought that all electronic communication was phony baloney. But I changed my mind. I went and volunteered at the local Pacifica nonprofit radio station in Berkeley, KPFA. And they told me, even though I had my master's degree, that if I'd like to volunteer, I should sit at this desk. And when I hear the doorbell, I should push this button to let people in the front door. So I gladly did that. And within 3 weeks, I had learned how to produce a radio program. I produced a program called You Don't Have to Be From Out of Town to Be Psychic. I was interviewing my local psychic friends. The program director liked it so much, they gave me a regular slot. And so within a few weeks of my dream, I found myself sitting across the table every Tuesday and Thursday at noon with the people I most wanted to talk to who were on book tours with all of my favorite subjects passing through San Francisco with 10,000 people listening in. And that gave me the confidence to then go back to the university and take advantage of a very obscure program they had called the Individual Interdisciplinary Doctoral Major, where if you want to work on a PhD program, but no department will sponsor you, but you could find professors from different departments who would be willing to do that, you could create such a degree. So that's how I got my start as a professional working in parapsychology. And I was a graduate student in parapsychology from 1973 all the way to 1980. And I can tell you, the closer I got to graduating, the more obstacles were thrown in front of me because it was unique. Nobody had ever done a doctoral degree in parapsychology. And there are organizations of professional skeptics. Well, they're not real skeptics. I think a more accurate word would be scoffers. A true skeptic is someone who's skeptical of themselves, but these scoffers are full of self-confidence and know that they have the absolute truth, and that the absolute truth is that uh, psychic functioning is impossible. So I've had to battle with those people. In fact, after my degree was awarded, they launched an effort to push on the university, to pressure the university to withdraw my degree. And I had to fight a libel suit that went on for 6 years because of all of that. And at the end of that time, I actually prevailed against them. So that gives you a brief picture of how I got started.
Well, thank God you did prevail through that. That must have been incredibly difficult back then. Uh, thanks for talking about that, Dr. Mishlove. I I'm incredibly impressed with how you've managed to navigate all of this. And I guess our next question would be, you've interviewed a diverse range of thinkers and researchers on New Thinking Aloud. Are there any common threads or shared insights that have emerged across these various conversations?
Well, as a matter of fact, there are, and it's not just New Thinking Aloud. There was before that. I did a public television series called Thinking Aloud. That was all over North America on satellite from 1987 through 2002. And prior to that, for many years, I was doing radio interviews. And I would say this: the common thread that seems to run through almost all of the interviews is the idea that everything is interrelated. You could say we are all one, and as mystics would say, we are one with everything, which can be very troublesome to some people who think in terms of duality, that there's good and evil, and I'm associated with the good, and evil is outside of me. Which is, it's a necessary point of view from one perspective, but the people I often interview, and I think I've come to this point of view myself, is to embrace everything, the whole world, every bit of it, even though I know there's a lot of pain and suffering in the world. I think I'm willing to accept that I'm part of every bit of it.
And isn't it amazing how once you embrace that, things seem to kind of fall into place? Like you talk about how you went from where you were to suddenly interacting with all these people that you admired, going down this path that you sort of that you have uniquely embodied. Isn't it just amazing how the universe sort of embraces us in that way when we take bold steps?
Yes, it is amazing. And what I tell people, the main message for other people from my experience is that when you resolve to become the very best version of yourself, the universe wants to help you, and the universe will reach out and provide guidance for you. In my case, the guidance came through dreams and synchronicities primarily. But I think this is what the universe really wants from each of us, is to become the best possible version, and which is different for each and every person.
Let me just see if this mic works. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep, you're all good.
Oh,
Loud and
amazing.
clear. Yes, loud and clear.
Thank you there. Yeah, so we had this little hiccup when we first started, right, with the space not starting. So if you guys could go ahead and just tweet the space so people can make sure they're in the right space, that they don't think it's like over, because that earlier one only lasted a few minutes. So just try and retweet this one out so people know the right one. Anyway, yeah, so your book, The Roots of Consciousness, is a comprehensive exploration of the history and science of consciousness and the paranormal. How do you think our understanding of these subjects has evolved since you first wrote this book?
That's a really good question. And I have to say this, in terms of scientific parapsychology, knowledge that we gain through various forms of research. The field goes back to 1882, when the Society for Psychical Research was founded in London. So we have at this point over 140 years of scientific data. In the early days, it was mostly field study. The investigators in the 19th century tended to approach it the way a detective might try to solve a crime, by getting testimony and corroborating witnesses and so on regarding paranormal events. Uh, they did a lot of really good work, and some brilliant findings were published in 1902 in a book written by Frederick Myers called Human Personality and Its Survival of Bodily Death. It's a real classic. So the next big step forward began in the 1930s, when J.B. Rhine at Duke University developed experiments, ways of coming up with statistical tests, typically a card guessing and dice throwing experiments. So he really developed the field of experimental parapsychology, which has advanced a lot. And has developed new technologies using, for example, quantum mechanical random event generators. uh, there's a sense in which we've learned some new things from the experimental work, but in a way, the early findings are very hard to come up with more advanced ideas than were developed in 1902 in Frederick Myers' book. But there are many areas where we now know more. For example, the relationship between altered states of consciousness and psychic functioning is a whole line of new research since the early days. And there's now research in psychic healing and research on reincarnation that didn't exist in the 19th century. So, uh, William James, who is one of the founders of the field of American psychology
Okay,
and
great.
was deeply involved.
Let me. I just wanted to say real quick. I think with Buddy, we had like I think 20 minutes, right? Or I'm not sure how long are we going to have you for tonight, Doctor. I want to make sure we
Well,
get
I
to
had kind
questions
of
from other
left
people.
out about an hour. if that's okay.
Yeah, that's great. So that'll leave us, I think, what, maybe 5 more minutes, and then we'll go ahead and open the floor for people to ask questions. Cool. All right, Paul, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Well, let's see. Where I was just going to say, William James said that in this field you can't expect progress decade by decade like you do in other fields, but really more by the century and by the half century, because the findings are so profound. They really shake up our metaphysical understanding. We tend to live in a materialist world where people think that the very foundation of reality is physical matter, whereas the field of parapsychology suggests that the foundation of reality is mental.
If I may piggyback on that, Dr. Mishlove, do you foresee a world wherein, twofold question, do you foresee a world wherein we can actually scientifically prove consciousness to be the basis of reality? And two, do you like even if we prove that, do you think that there might still be aspects of these phenomena, such as non-local consciousness, the afterlife, the UFO phenomenon, which I know we would like to dive into at some point? Do you think that there might be that some of these phenomena might be outside of the realm of science, or no? And do you see a world where science can actively disprove reductionist materialism, for example?
Yeah, the idea that materialism is dead was first expressed, I think, in the early part of the 20th century by none other than the founder of quantum physics, whose name is on the tip of my tongue, and you'd think I would know that, Max Planck, uh, who wrote that, as far as he's concerned, consciousness is fundamental. He says you can't get underneath consciousness. And he went on to say that uh, many people think that matter creates consciousness, but he said, no, it's the reverse. Consciousness creates matter. So that idea has been expressed by many of the pioneers of quantum physics going back just about 100 years at this point. And it's a conclusion, it's not just an experimental conclusion, it's one that involves a lot of philosophical rigor as well. And it certainly goes against the mainstream of what Western society considers to be true. Even though Max Planck was a great scientist, it's not as if his thinking about it has filtered down all the way into society. That may take centuries more.
Do you think there's anything beyond the realms of science? Do you think science can cover all of this? And then I'm
No,
going to for a
not.
question.
Yeah, I mean, science might be able, for example, to analyze the mathematical properties of a Bach concerto or a Mozart symphony, but science is not able to explain how you feel when you're listening to that symphony, or what your experience is like falling in love. Uh, Science is pretty good with things that can be reduced to mathematical formulas, is very good for that. But large parts of reality are sort of beyond science. I would say most of reality is beyond science, although science itself is terribly important.
I totally agree. I just want to say, for our guest up here, just go ahead and raise your hand, and we'll just call on you in the order that you guys raise your hands. So, if we can best remember the right order. Anyway, go ahead, Venny.
Hi, Dr. Mishlove. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here. And thanks, Logan and Paul, for hosting this. I wanted to ask you a question. You mentioned earlier, you touched on near-death experience. And I'm curious if any of your studies focus on near-death experiences in children. Thanks so much.
It's a very interesting topic, near-death experiences in children. I ought to look into it more deeply, but the truth is I don't have much to say about that topic. It's a specific area in which I'm not particularly knowledgeable. I can say a few things about children, and one of the most important things I can tell you is that children who remember their near-death experience and describe what it's like in the afterlife are very similar to children who remember past lives. In fact, children who remember past lives often also remember the space in between lifetimes, and their descriptions seem very, very similar to the near-death experience descriptions. And researchers are also particularly interested in children who remember their past lives because when an adult claims to remember the past life, there's a much greater probability that the adult could be remembering something they've read or learned about that sort of contaminates uh, the experience from a research point of view. Whereas when a young child starts describing a past life, and they often do this almost as soon as they can talk, there's every reason to think that the child is much less likely than an adult to be repeating back something that they learned somewhere else otherwise.
Okay. Thank you. C, go ahead, C.
Thanks, Logan. Thanks, Dr. Mishlove. I have a question. I actually posted it to you on Twitter as well. I believe that lack of empathy from others is one of the main causes of anxiety and depression. And I wondered if you've seen any studies that confirm this issue and what the resultant impact to the health of the rest of the body has been, whilst the brain focuses on resolving these issues, which impacts the body controlling organ.
I'm not aware of any research connecting lack of empathy or compassion to depression. It's an interesting hypothesis. But as far as I know, the causes of depression are complex. They often are situational. If somebody gets fired from their job or experiences some other abusive or tragic circumstance, that can often trigger uh, depression. A lot of it has to do with early childhood experiences and interactions that occur with family members, particularly before the age of 6, when a young child sort of internalizes everything uh, that others may say. And we often live in a culture where people can be very harsh and demeaning towards each other. And when you have a lot of that in your life and you internalize it, and that can lead to depression. But it can also lead at times to lack of empathy. So these things get sort of entangled with each other.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Paul. I think Paul had a question for you.
Okay. Yeah, and then I think we can get over to some of the hands. But my big question right now, I'm so fascinated by your interviews that you did back in the day with Terence McKenna, Jacques Vallée, and Dr. John E. Mack. And I was just curious whether you take such a multidisciplinary approach to all of these subjects, whether it's UFOs or consciousness or whatever. And I was just wondering whether, when it comes to UFOs, have you gained a more holistic perspective on that topic? For example, the relationship between UFOs and the afterlife, or any of these different fields. Have you gained a a holistic perspective, and would you like to comment on where you're at when it comes to UFOs? Thank you.
Yeah, I engaged in UFO research going back to the 1970s. And with Jacques Vallée, my first interview was with him in 1973. And my most recent interviews with him have been within the last year. So there's been, 50 years there in which we have known each other and interacted with each other. UFOs, as far as I'm concerned, are extraordinarily complex and mystifying. They seem to be, um, they seem to defy almost any theory you might posit about them. And I think the reason for that is that we're probably dealing with more than just a single phenomenon. We're probably dealing with multiple phenomena that get lumped together. Some of them are very spiritual in nature. I not long ago interviewed Chris Bledsoe. In fact, we'll be doing a live stream with him this Sunday. His experiences are like orbs with angelic creatures or angelic beings, really. On the other hand, I also recently interviewed Ray Stanford. And although Ray is a former psychic and channeler, he explained to me that he sees UFOs as nuts and bolts devices that are powered by physical systems and can be explained entirely in terms of their physical and mechanical properties. So, there's a wide range of ways of looking at it. And in spite of the fact that people have been researching UFOs for many, many decades, I think we have an awful lot to learn. We're still so ignorant about what's going on. And the field gets even more confused by various examples of misinformation and disinformation and the government efforts to kind of squash research in this area. Now that's ended as far as I can tell, but it went on for decades. So we don't know yet everything that the government knows, and the government certainly doesn't know everything that many private researchers know. So the field
Just
is
one
under.
quick follow-up to that. Do you think that UFOs could be the bridge, that they could bridge the gap between our knowledge and other aspects of this field of consciousness, and perhaps that's why it's been so the waters are so muddy?
I do. I think UFOs are a very important key to understanding what's going on. I guess my approach in general has been to look at the most bizarre phenomena, the phenomena that are the hardest for people to digest, that because they push everybody's boggle threshold, and people therefore who have these experiences are often afraid to talk about them. But I tend to think that the most unusual experiences that human beings have are the ones that will give us the most insight.
Okay, let's get
Thank
to a
you so much.
Michael. Michael, how's it going?
Good, thanks, Logan, and thanks, Dr. Mishlove. Great to have you sharing Logan's space. Just first with C, one of the people in my group does research in, or has done, quite a research into the Capgras delusion, and that's people that believes that people close to them are imposters or their favourite possessions are forgeries. And they did some testing with galvanic skin response. So you measure the perspiration, and it indicates a level of emotional connection if you get a high galvanic skin response. And you can show someone a set of photos, random people or people that they're close to, and the people that they're close to, they'll give a galvanic skin response, and the people that they're not close to, they won't. And what was interesting with people with the Capgras delusion is that they never give a galvanic skin response. So, from a philosophical point of view, it showed the role that emotion played with reasoning. And another group that also show this lack of galvanic skin response are problem gamblers. They don't get that kind of gut feeling of, I shouldn't be taking this risk, that sort of thing. So if you're kind of looking at the emotional connection, which I think you were kind of aiming at, people with anxiety at the other end, they're getting an exacerbation of emotional responses. And there's probably a level of, cognitive processing too there, of catastrophizing a small event, and making it into a bigger event that's probably not there. And that happens also with depression, in a negative way. But I originally put my hand up for just to kind of align with Dr. Mishlove that I think consciousness plays a huge role, and probably the leading role in influencing matter. And there's no doubt of that in terms of things that we see in neuroplasticity, for example. But the other couple of things that came to my mind were the role of the observer effect influencing experiments. And I had another one. Oh yeah, there's a classic, the Jack Benavistine paper on the memory of water, and how they lost that influence when it became a double-blind study. And to me, they always dismissed, the fact that there was this sort of imprint in water. But what if it was lost when you had a double blind? Then what it suggested to me was that there was a role of consciousness. And there's some really interesting research more recently by Luc Montagnier in DNA waves and how information is transmitted that way through water as well. Anyway, thanks, and great to hear from you.
Well, thank you for all of those comments. You've raised many, many different points. With regard to galvanic skin response, I can add something to the complexity of what you've already described, which is a whole series of studies that have been replicated a number of times. And I'm talking about double-blind studies. The term that's used to define this category is called presentiment. And what happens is people are given a stimulus that would normally evoke a galvanic skin response. However, in this study, what they find is that the galvanic skin response shows up before the stimulus occurred. And we're talking about a situation in which a series of random stimuli are presented to various experimental subjects. Some of them are neutral, they will not evoke a response, and some of them will. And what they find is that often a second or two before the presentation of the stimuli that are provocative, the skin response occurs, which suggests that even before people are consciously aware of, let's call it a telepathic message or a clairvoyant message, the nervous system, the body itself seems to pick up on them.
Yeah, I seem to remember is it the PAIRS group, the Princeton Engineering Anomalous Research Group back in the 90s were doing some stuff related to that too.
Yeah, and it's been repeated, I think, in about a dozen different laboratories at this point.
You have to excuse me. I don't. It's hard to keep track of the order of hands when they start going up in their ways. But I think Garrett was next. I think, or Guy, and then Screen. Sorry if that's not the right order, but
Sounds good to me.
Hey,
Garrett can go.
Dr. Mishlove, it's a pleasure to be able to talk to you. I had a question. I'm a big fan of your show, and I'm a big fan of the interviews you've done with remote viewers like Lynn Buchanan and Joe McMoneagle. And something I noticed about both of those guys is they spoke very highly of Major General Albert Stubblebine and their time serving under him. Then I read Men Who Stare at Goats, and John Ronson made him seem like a buffoon. I wanted to know what your opinion on him was and why you think there seems to be a deliberate effort to make him look silly.
Well, the movie Men Who Stare at Goats was built for entertainment. It wasn't meant to be a completely accurate depiction of what happened. And in fact, there are many aspects of that movie that were not accurate. On the one hand, on the other hand, I think it's fair to say that human beings are complex, and that General Stubblebine was a very important pioneer in helping to launch the Stargate program and the U.S. government's 20-year foray into remote viewing that produced remarkable results. But, he was a human being as well who had some foibles, and they could be exaggerated and criticized in a fictional film like that.
Yeah, go ahead. I think it was Guy, right?
Hey, yeah, it was. Yeah, I've just got to say, Jeffrey, thank you very much for coming and doing the space tonight. Me and my granddad used to get videos sent over from America. Watch pretty much most of your shows, and I know a lot of people are asking you questions about like the UFO topic and so forth these days. But I would like to know who was the favourite? Who's the best interview that you actually covered on the old Thinking Aloud, or even the new Thinking Aloud, and why and what it actually meant for you, or what it actually
It's a difficult
gave to you?
question to answer because every video I do is the best one while I'm doing it. Nevertheless, some of them do stand out in my mind. From the original Thinking Aloud series, I've often felt that in my early years, one of the most influential mentors I ever had was Jean Houston, a brilliant woman. She's still out there doing workshops and seminars today. I highly encourage anybody who has an opportunity to have an experience of her to take advantage of that. But more recently, it's very hard to say because my goal in doing these interviews is to be 100% present with the interviewer. And I sometimes find that, some people are very profound and very famous because of that. And other people are less so, maybe less profound and certainly less well known. But when you're 100% present with another human being, you're going to learn from them regardless. And so it's not always about who the quality of the interviewee. It's also about the quality of the attention that you give that person while you're doing an interview or while you're listening to an interview. It's one of the reasons why I have on the New Thinking Aloud channel a whole series of monologues. I call them In Presence because it goes back to this idea of being 100% present with other people, not letting your mind wander, for example. But I'll give you another example of an interview that had a big impact on me. Surprisingly, it was with Rollo May. He's long deceased. He was one of the founders of the field of existential psychotherapy, and he wrote about people's depression, as a matter of fact, related to a previous questioner, and how depression itself it can be a doorway to deeper realms of consciousness. That there's a sense in which any person who is awake to all of the pain and tragedy going on in this world is going to experience at least a certain amount of depression. And I found that after I read his classic book, it's called Love and Will, uh, I felt so moved. I started crying just from reading his book. That's a very rare experience for me. And it was because he was touching something so deep in the human soul itself. I tend to think, oddly enough, that we often live our lives, and I'm including myself in this, at a very superficial level. And the reason for that is because we try to protect ourselves from all the pain and suffering that's out there in the world. It's not easy to open yourself up to the fact that children are starving right at this very minute, and all sorts of other forms of oppression and atrocity are taking place. I'd like to live in a little heavenly domain that I could create for myself, and for the most part I think I've been successful at that, but there's a price you pay for your comfort and your happiness. Um, so people who remind us of the pain and suffering in the world, I think, do us all a great pleasure. But naturally, there's much more to life than just being aware of other people's pain and suffering. So there are many things to be joyful about as well. And Gene Houston was a real master at getting people in touch with, I would even go so far as to say, ecstasy.
Thank you very much, Doctor. I really appreciate that. I was actually going to say Rollo was one of my top three interviews. Steven Pinker is also one of my favourite ones, and I think Terence McKenna, the hallucinogenic, the interview you did. That's I think that's very popular now, I believe.
Yeah.
Because we did microdosing. But yeah, thank you very much. I really appreciate you speaking to us and giving the answer. Take care, and you very much deserve that prize as well. Very well done. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Great. I got
Excellent. Oh yes. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say who's up for the next question, but go ahead, Logan. Sorry about that.
Oh, no worries. Go ahead. So I got Buddy here. So Buddy said, he couldn't make it and whatnot, but he did say he had one question, and it was not one he worded very well, but I'm going to try to make it out. He said it's he's been trying to get the answer for a while. He said you mentioned it on one of your shows. It's a funny name that's given to phenomena locations. Do you know what that is?
A funny name given to
phenomena locations. I don't know what that means.
Phenomena. Yeah, I'm not.
Hotspots, maybe hotspots. Flaps.
That term, hotspots. You mean places like Skinwalker Ranch, for example?
Yeah.
Well, I think calling it a hotspot is probably as good as anything else I've heard.
Same. I'm not sure what his question really was. That's okay. Screen was next. Go ahead, Screen.
Hey, I appreciate everybody coming together for the space, and yeah, it stinks Buddy couldn't make it. He's like our local legend when it comes to this stuff. Maybe he was talking about like electron diffusion regions or vial vortices. That would be some weird names for hotspots or whatever. But I was wondering what your thoughts were on some of this newer information that is coming out with like EM fields, affecting plasma, therefore microtubules or consciousness. And, since we're getting into the stuff where consciousness affects these these quantum computers and, the ability to throw heads and tails and stuff like that, we're starting to prove that consciousness actually, it affects reality. So in that sense, what do you think about, a lot of this stuff, taking place consciously, but also like physically in a manner of speaking, or anything along those routes?
Well, it's very important, that research that's being done showing that consciousness can directly impact physical systems, and it's gotten quite sophisticated. They have set up interferometers and double slit experiments, getting to some of the really fundamental questions in physics, like what is the role of the observer in physics itself? So that's very important, empirical data. However, the interpretations of the data can be, um, let me see, what's the best word for this? Well, let me try and explain. If historically speaking, people looking at the paranormal have always reached out for what they thought was the cutting edge of science at that time to explain it. So back in the 18th century, when Mesmer was developing what we now call hypnosis, he called it animal magnetism, because magnetism at the time was sort of the cutting edge of science. And then in the 19th century, when there was the theory that the ethers were what were responsible for the propagation of radio waves, people in the Theosophical Society and elsewhere, including scientists, developed the idea of the etheric body. So esoteric thinking today still refers to the etheric body, and it's based on an obsolete scientific theory. And even an earlier generation, you had like the 15th century, and in medieval times, people were talking about the astral plane because they had these theories concerning the seven heavens and the planets that surrounded the earth and the music of the celestial spheres. And they thought as you enter into altered states of consciousness, you're moving up into the stars or the astral plane where the planets are. Uh, these days, quantum theory is sort of the cutting edge of science. And so there's a lot of effort to try and develop theories of consciousness based on quantum theory. And I think there may be something to it. I like the idea of quantum entanglement because it suggests that all is one, everything is entangled with everything else. But I think we have to be very cautious about relying on what happens to be the cutting edge of science in our generation, because in future generations it's going to be different. And I suspect that people will always be looking for whatever is the latest, hottest scientific theory as a way to explain consciousness. And because consciousness itself is fundamental, because you can't, as Max Planck said, you can't get underneath it, we may never come up with an adequate scientific theory of consciousness.
All right, so we got Rabbi next, and then Lucius. Okay, go ahead, Rabbi.
Thank you so much, Logan, for the opportunity. Thank you so much, Dr. Mishlove, for being here. My question is in relation to transhumanism. Doctor, do you think that transhumanism will ever be at such a point where a human can upload their mind and perhaps live immortally? Thank you.
I tend to believe we're already immortal beings. That is, we have an immortal spirit that we all share. But I'm very skeptical of the transhumanistic philosophy. I think it's rooted in materialism, and that materialism is not an accurate portrayal. At the same time, I'm fascinated by Star Trek and the idea of Data, a robot who becomes fully conscious, or an android, I guess, as they call it. And I don't think that we know for sure that it's impossible. So while I tend to lean in the other direction, I guess I have to say time will tell. Um, but I'm inclined to think that the transhumanists are uh, pointing us in the wrong direction.
Okay, so I think next up was Rabbi, or
Oh, no, it was Lucius. Go ahead, Lucius. Sorry about that.
No worries. Logan, thank you for hosting the space. Dr. Mishlove, thank you for being here. Okay, so Screen asked a question about viral vortices, essentially, which you could say are electromagnetic vortices that are based off like ley lines and things of that nature. And just now you were speaking on the spheres of conscious creation in a way where like the outer realms exist in the stars. What do you think the relationship is, if consciousness is fundamental, between the viral vortices and the outer realms, and how that relates to our circadian rhythm?
Well, that's a deep question. Let me start by saying that a lot of people get very caught up in thinking in terms of electromagnetic energy. And of course, electromagnetic energy is very important. It's how we move our muscles, it's how our nervous system operates. But I don't think you can explain the paranormal from an electromagnetic perspective. There are people back in the day who used to say that psychic phenomena cannot be real because uh, they don't behave the way electromagnetic waves behave, which is true. They don't. Uh, People, clairvoyants, for example, can obtain information from distant locations, even as far away as Jupiter, uh, in ways that defy electromagnetic propagation. So, whatever's going on with paranormal activity is not electromagnetic. Now, in terms of our circadian rhythms, pretty much seems to be conditioned by the rotation of the Earth around the sun. I don't think you need to reach out into the far reaches of the universe for that. And in terms of the so-called ley lines and vortices, I have to say, as a parapsychologist, I know there's a lot of folklore in that area, but I'm not aware of any solid experimental evidence or even good field studies that validate any of that. So, to my way of thinking, it's still in the realm of folklore. It doesn't mean it's invalid. It simply means that I don't have enough data to really say anything intelligent about it at this point.
Okay. Go ahead, Screen, and then I
Thank you.
just had like one more comment. Yeah.
Appreciate it. Along the lines of, I think Rabbi might have brought it up, and y'all kind of were talking about the transhumanism thing. You know, most of our regulars, they know I've had an experience with a drone, and I felt like there was a conscious link between myself and the drone. And I've talked with John Burroughs, and we did a Twitter space with Steve Mira, and they're talking about biocircuits with plasma memory and essentially consciousness uploaded into these drones and using a form of AI. I was wondering your thoughts on that.
Well, to the best of my knowledge, AI is not yet conscious, and I'm very skeptical about the idea that people are able to upload their consciousness into electronic devices at this point in time. Maybe in the future it will be possible. I, for example, have uploaded over 1,000 videos of myself onto YouTube, but I'm quite sure that none of them are conscious.
So, what would you think would maybe like explain what I felt? Like I was inside. I just had an idea that popped into my head that I needed to go let my dogs out in the backyard, although I had just let them out. I even fought myself about it. And then when I experienced the crap or saw it, my cell phone was in my hand the whole time. But once I decided that I actually needed to take the picture, was when it cloaked on me, like it knew exactly what I was thinking, or it was linked somehow. I was wondering what your thoughts were on that as well.
So you're talking about a drone, or are you talking about an unidentified object?
Yeah, when I say drone, it's like a black triangle craft about the size of a small plane.
I see. Well, I mean, we don't know what would be inside of such an object. It could be a living being, or as you seem to be postulating, maybe it is some sort of a mechanical device that is conscious. All we know at this point is that you had a feeling at the time, and I encourage people to trust their feelings and trust their intuition in particular. But at the same time, I think it's fair to say that we're all liable individually to make mistakes, to be wrong about things, to even do things or think things that are completely foolish. So until we have more data about it, I think a good idea to just regard your feelings as a hypothesis that awaits confirmation or disconfirmation.
I appreciate that answer. And actually, there's been some evidence to link it. You were saying about like trust your intuition. These gamma waves and the fight or flight state. Which involves intuition. So that's very interesting. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
On that note, just real quick, Dr. Mishlove, do you feel that any aspect of the UFO phenomenon, or perhaps artificial intelligence, like Screen was talking about, do you feel like any of this can hold up a mirror to our nature as, quote, souls? In other words, do you feel that there is something inherent to our experience as conscious human beings that perhaps, as you're implying, I think, might not be able to be embodied by artificial means? Thank you.
I do. I interviewed Marvin Minsky years ago, who one of the founders of the whole field of artificial intelligence. And he put it this way. He said, "We are pieces of meat. We are machines made out of meat." And he said, "You should be proud to be a machine made out of meat." But I disagree with him completely. I don't think that we are machines. I think that the human being is a soul, and that the data of parapsychology suggests that human consciousness has many properties that go far beyond the properties of meat or anything mechanical. And that if people can recognize their internal spiritual nature and their internal sovereignty as individuals, I feel very strongly about the sovereignty of individuals, and I'm very much opposed to uh, efforts by different organizations and groups of people to rob the individual of their autonomy and their sovereignty. Then we understand that there's something within each of us. I would say that within each person there's a soul that has evolved, that has to do with your emotions, your preferences. It may have uh, made you who you are, the unique person that you are, and possibly, for all we know, over many lifetimes. A soul that goes from body to body to body. But even deeper than the soul is what I call the spirit, which is, uh, you might say, infinite and immortal. And that's also who we are at our deepest essence. So none of that is mechanical, and I don't think any of it can be captured by machines. In fact, I would go so far as to say that everything physical emerges from the spirit, not the other way around.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I just have one last question. I swear, just on that note, do you think that either in the near future or the future or in the past, that we had a better understanding of that of our nature as spirit? Do you think we could be coming to a time where we might regain that knowledge? I'm just curious.
Well, there are different cultures have had different ways of approaching it. I mean, you get a very pure picture in yoga and the Vedanta traditions of India, or in the shamanistic traditions of ancient cultures, or in Taoism, and even in Judaism and Christianity, or Buddhism. There's a lot of wisdom from ancient cultures, but we live in our own unique cultural period, and I regard all of those ancient traditions from all cultures as part of our inheritance today. I think, we all have a responsibility, I think, to be aware of the vast pool of wisdom into which we were born. But science also has something to contribute. And I do think that we will come to new understandings, and we are. I mean, I I interview authors all the time, and I know how many new books are being published every month. So, yeah, our awareness of who we are as conscious entities, as biological entities, as entities who are both physical and non-physical at the same time. I think that knowledge is constantly growing and becoming more sophisticated.
So perfect. Thank you so much.
So let me just stop real quick. So we are officially I think it's important that we have like a respectful environment and just clear communications. I think pretty crucial. And so our the time commitment you allotted for us, Dr. Mishlove, is over by 20 minutes now. And so I just want to give you a heads up about that in case you had other time commitments or something to do. But I mean, I know time got away from us a little bit because great conversations and all. But I just wanted to see if you wanted to go ahead and wrap things up, or if you're cool with we got more questions still if you want to keep talking. But just wanted to put
Well,
that out.
I think my wife has dinner ready for me.
Okay, great. Yeah. So I mean, I appreciate you being here with everybody. I think everyone had a good time. Paul, did you want to say anything?
No, I thank you. I hope your dinner is warm and delicious, and it's just so great having you come in here. Like you've been doing this for so long, as we've discussed. You've personally introduced me to so many incredible figures, speakers, icons. I know that's the case for many others listening. This has been a really special space, so I just really appreciate it, Dr. Mishlove.
Well, it's been
Yeah.
a pleasure to meet you, and it's a new experience for me. My first experience on a Twitter group. So, thank you for inviting me.
You're more than welcome. I think that I just want to express my gratitude for your contributions as well, and your expertise. Has brought a lot of value here. I think everyone has gained a lot from your wisdom today. So, I mean, if there's anything else, any kind of like final message you'd like to share, feel free to do so. Otherwise, yeah, I appreciate you hanging out with us today. Thanks a lot.
My pleasure, and I will share with you my personal motto. It's something I try to live up to. I can't say I succeed, but it's what I believe I should do, which is to love everything and everyone all the time.
Yeah, it's beautiful. All right. Well, yeah, thank you, Dr. Mishlove, and welcome, host. Did you want to do something? I know you had something prepared.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight for this special space with Dr. Jeffrey Mishlove. To find out more about Dr. Jeffrey Mishlove, you can go to his website at www.thinkingaloud.com. That's thinkingaloud.com. And make sure to subscribe to Logan for all the latest Twitter spaces for the UFO community. We thank you for joining us tonight.
me feeling like Tupacalypse. I would've been on top the charts, but it's politics. You do some gimmick shit and post, you get a lot of clicks. Drop some real shit and they probably won't acknowledge it.